Welcome to my dad's car. Enjoy!
Welcome to My Dad's Car, a podcast discussing our personal relationship with automotive nostalgia. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be about your dad's car. It can be your mum's, your grand's, your parents', guardians, or even a neighbour's. If it made an impression, let's talk about it. Hello, how are you doing?
Very well, how are you?
I'm not too bad. Hello, John.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
How are you doing? All right?
Wonderful. I'm round at my friend James's today. James and Martha have kindly lent me their kitchen because we've got a gas man due any moment at home. He's probably going to create merry hell in our kitchen.
All right.
And hopefully fix the fact we've got no hot water.
We bumped into them in Birmingham, didn't we, I think? They came to see us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they live at the top of my road. And very kindly, James has said, I'm at work, but you can use my kitchen or my house.
Hopefully he's not expecting dinner as well.
So, yeah, thank you for joining us, John.
Pleasure, thanks for having me.
So, yeah, we'll welcome John Marcar along to the podcast this morning. You host the Driven podcast, is that correct?
I do, yeah, host the Driven podcast. So, face of and alarmingly brain of Driven.
Okay.
So, yeah, we are a weekly podcast, a YouTube channel, good old-fashioned online editorial. So, yeah, I guess the easiest term for who am I, what do I do? I'm a motoring journalist that also has a podcast and just generally mucks about in cars and motorcycles.
And is this a day job or is this a hobby that's out of hand?
It's a job, yeah. This is my full-time job, which is remarkable, really. But yes, it started off as a bit of a hobby, I guess. We were a bit of a lockdown project, like many people, back in 2020. My background is actually event production, so all automotive. But yes, event production was my thing. I've dabbled in the world of media over the years, done a little bit of presenting here and there, done some stuff on the radio here and there. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, completely transformed my business, which was at the time event production.
Yeah.
I was twiddling my thumbs and I got a phone call saying, look, we're starting this thing called Driven. Would you want to be involved? So I came in as a bit of a brain to help get it all started, but also as a host and as a presenter.
Yeah.
And a few years later, I'm now running it, which is fun.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to have you with us. We'll kick off, as we always do, really, with asking you what your earliest car memory is.
Do you know, I've been thinking about this a while. I've been listening to a few of your old episodes with some of my friends.
How brilliant.
And it was quite nice. I started writing some notes on things that I can remember. As for the earliest memory, it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be sat in the back of my mum's chocolate brown 1980s Ford Cortina on school run to and from, or my dad, when I was very small, ran a workshop in Croydon, essentially servicing the company cars for Balfour Beatty, which is mainly like a rail technology company, engineering company. So I was always running around in that workshop, probably, frowned upon massively these days in the world of health and safety. But I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and I can really vividly remember running around and looking at things like Ford Sierras and Ford Orions and old, probably E30 era and maybe just E36 era company cars. There'll be the executive cars going up on the ramps. And yeah, it's probably a combination of those two things.
Fantastic. Let's start with your mum's car then, the chocolate brown. Was it Cortina, did you say?
It was a Cortina, yeah. It was a 1982, and I looked it up the other day because I got a photo of it that I took, which I think might have been the first ever photograph of a car I would have ever taken.
Okay, yeah. Is it any good?
It's all right. The whole car's in there, which is good. But yeah, I remember getting a little film camera as a kid one Christmas, and I consciously remember thinking, what should the first photograph be? So I went outside in my socks onto the driveway and snapped this photo of my mum's brown Cortina, registration DFE287X. And I looked it up the other day on the DVLA website. I thought, I wonder if the car's still around. And I'm sure it's rotting in a field somewhere. But as far as the DVLA are concerned, it still exists.
Wow.
But put it this way, I think my mum sold it mid-90s because it was rusting into a ball of orange at that point. So I can't imagine anyone's seen it and gone, well, I better restore that because it's going to be a classic. Because it's not. But yes, I have such happy memories of that car. I can remember, I have this amazing long-term memory. I can remember standing up behind the driver's seat, being able to stand up in the rear half of the car because I was only that tall, Yeah, we used to go everywhere in that car. That was the school run car. That was holidays to the South Coast car. Really wonderful thing. And I remember loads of little obscure things about it, like the headlining was perforated. If you remember on old Fords from the 80s and 90s, they had the perforated headlining. And I can remember just sitting in the back of the car and looking up at it. Silly little things like that, which I love.
Can you remember where the car was bought, John?
No, I think it was probably bought. So speaking to relatives, the car was bought probably a year or two before I was born. I was born in 1987 and the car was in 1982. So at this point, it's probably lived a good life already before it ended up in my mum's hands.
Yeah.
But yes, it will be the first car I ever was in as a baby. It was probably the car I went home from the hospital in.
Yeah.
And it remained as our family car for a good long time. Yeah.
Who else was in it? Have you got brothers and sisters?
Yes, so I've got an older sister, slightly older, 18 months older than me. So yeah, I have very, very fond memories, as I say, going down to the South Coast. We didn't have an awful lot of money as a family when I was small. So for us, the holidays were places like Littlehampton on the South Coast.
We know it well.
Yeah.
We do, yeah.
Day trips down to Rustington and that sort of thing. And everything about that, it always felt special. I grew up in southwest London in a little town called Mitcham, not too far from Wimbledon, which is, of course, the town everyone knows. Yeah, we'd hop in the car and go down and spend a day or two down on the South Coast. And it was always exciting. If we were going in the car, it was for a good reason. And for that reason, it felt special.
Yeah. I'm in Worthing, and I met John when we were working in Bognor. So we kind of know those parts well. When you were in the cars, do you recall music at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to do a bit of scene setting. So my mum and dad divorced when I was very, very small. Okay. So it was quite interesting having mum's side. Yeah, I lived with mum Monday to Friday. And dad was like weekend dad, and he'd always have cool cars because of his jobs. But both mum and dad had amazing music taste. Dad is still to this day a bit of a rocker and is a very, very talented guitarist and introduced me to all sorts of amazing rock music when I was younger. But mum, very much the same, actually. And she ranged probably a bit softer than dad's side in terms of music, but loads of things like Fleetwood Mac, Sade. I can remember blasting Sade out the speakers in this Cortina.
Bit of a smooth operator, was he?
Yeah. What else? Gosh, mum I say mum didn't like heavy metal, but she actually was a bit of a fan of things like Deep Purple. So listening to Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, being told who Ozzy Osbourne was as a small child, listening to him on the radio. Loads of a great introduction to music, actually, as a youngster. And it was a big part of the journeys as well. We'd be listening to music, sometimes fairly loud in this car, driving along to the beach.
Yeah.
It's funny how the car, sort of being in the car with your parents, doesn't only influence you in sort of maybe getting into cars, but it's the same with music, isn't it, really? You're trapped in the little capsule and you've got to listen to it no matter what.
Absolutely. This is something I bring this up on our podcast time and time again when talking to guests, because I often ask the same question, talk to me about early memories in cars. And it's amazing what gets unfolded from that. And sometimes you think back to really obscure little memories that at the time might have meant nothing. It might not have been a key, or you might not have thought of it as an integral chapter for your life moving forward. But you think back to the journeys that you were having, where you were going, the conversations that you'd have in the car, the music you listen to in the car. And it might be all these little things that just unlock opportunities or thought trains that you might then pick up on later in life, which, it is a box on wheels. But the stuff that can come out of just the most mundane journeys can be amazing, life-changing, really.
I suppose because back in the day you had so few options, didn't you, in terms of music? You might only have sort of 2 or 3 cassettes in your car if you were lucky. So
yeah,
it was just those that are going to be imprinted on your brain forever, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That time in the car is also kind of an opportunity to sort of get to know your parents, isn't it? Really kind of know where they came from, because actually very, very rarely will you kind of have a sit down with kind of your parents and ask them about maybe, their work or kind of where they grew up and those sort of things.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a chance to find out a bit more about your own family history because you've got nothing better to do.
It's absolutely right. And again, this is something else I always say. The intimacy of a car journey, a long journey, if you spend a couple of days on a road trip with a friend or even with somebody you might have met only once or twice, you can know more about that person than a work colleague you might have worked with for 10 years in a 2-day road trip, even a 1-day road trip. Because as you say, you're sat in this really intimate environment And providing you get on well with whoever you're in the car with, because of course it doesn't always work that way, let's be honest. But providing you get on well with the person, you can unpick all sorts of histories. And you're right. And, you know, for me, again, they're such happy memories for me because I can think back to even doing mundane things like going for the weekly shop. We'd go to Sainsbury's, we'd get the weekly shopping, and then we'd drive home. And my mum was just the most incredible person when it comes to like for me, my sister and I were her world.
Yeah.
We were all she ever wanted in life. And for her priority was making sure that we were happy above all else. And as I say, we weren't a family that had loads of money growing up, but she would do all she could to make sure that we were happy.
Yeah.
So for us, things like driving home from Sainsbury's to do the weekly shop, if there was something I was a bit unhappy about at school, or if there was something something that was bothering me, she'd be very aware of that. And she'd use that time in the car to almost have a bit of a counselling session. And I'd remember we'd get home and she wouldn't let me and my sister out of the car, or if it was just one of us or just me and mum, she'd say, you know, we won't get out of the car until we're both absolutely happy and satisfied that we're okay and we've talked everything through. And she was just amazing for that. And I love hearing other people's stories in that world. And I almost think like it could be a business in itself. You could do car counselling. You could have a trained counsellor or a psychotherapist quite happily driving around the M25 all day, every day. Although you might then need a separate counselling session afterwards, I suppose. But there is something about that capsule, about being in that environment where you feel inherently safe because you're with your mum, and you also feel safe because you're in a car. And it's an environment that has no interruption. You know, nobody's going to open the door and walk in. Yeah, really special for that.
It's a lack of eye contact as well, isn't it? Because you're typically set next to each other or kind of one behind the other.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like a confession, isn't it?
I guess it is in a way. I guess it is. Yeah, it is. And, you know, I have it with lots of friends. I've got an amazing network of friends. And as we do, I'm sure you guys are exactly the same. You end up going on road trips. It might be to go and buy a car. It might be to go and watch a motorsport event. It might be something not car related, but you end up in the car with your mates. And you end up having these really deep chats that I think otherwise, if you were sat opposite each other in the pub, you probably wouldn't dare go as detailed as you would be, or you wouldn't feel as comfortable. And I think you're right. I think the eye contact thing is a massive part of it.
Yeah.
You've got the ability to kind of not have any self-conscious feelings about the way you're acting or your body language. You can just kind of move forward. Somebody's got a task at hand, which is driving, still having the conversation. And yeah, it's a very unique environment for that sort of thing.
And finite, isn't it, almost? Because at the end, you open the door, get out, and actually you could just leave that there. You could never touch that again.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely and utterly. It's, once the doors are open, you're into a new environment now. That session is finished. And yeah, it'd be hard to replicate that around a kitchen table or around a dining room table. Cars can be quite powerful little places for that sort of thing.
So, yeah, I guess back on the car track, what came after the Cortina, do you know?
I do, because I have difficult memories with it. As I say, we weren't awfully wealthy. My mum, I think at the point that she decided, okay, the Cortina it's time for it to go. I think it probably failed an MOT, and there were conversations had about, okay, it's probably time we move the car on. My auntie Naomi, who is an angel of a human being, she at the time was just in the process of upgrading her car from a K10 Nissan Micra to a K11 Nissan Micra.
Is that the first of the bubble ones?
Yes, it was. So the K10 was the boxy one.
Yeah.
And then the K11 is the bubbly one. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
And you can probably see where I'm going with this, because my auntie Naomi...
I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, right. So my auntie Naomi was like, look, Sarah, that's my mum's name, don't worry about buying a new car. I've bought a new car. You can have the sky blue K10 Micra.
Oh, right.
And I remember mum going, oh, isn't this wonderful? We've been given a car. I was mortified. Because I was thinking, we had this, whilst the Cortina wasn't a posh car by any stretch of the imagination, it was quite big and imposing.
Got a presence, yeah.
Yeah, and suddenly we had this blue tin can of a car, which I remember like slamming the door and you get this dong, because it was just hollow. And of course, I mean, what a gesture, a free car. You think about it now as a 37-year-old adult, what a wonderful, beautiful thing to do, to give your sister and her children a car, transportation for free.
Yeah. But
I do remember being mortified. I was embarrassed by it. But I smile now when I see them on the road. I do every so often. I'm like, oh, look, there's one. But
I think back in the day, that was very much a sort of granny's car, wasn't it?
Exactly.
You'd see that and think that's a granny's car.
Yeah. Yeah.
High revs in second gear or first gear.
Yeah. Again, not too far from where we live, and a regular weekend haunt for us as a family would have been down in the Surrey Hills, places like Box Hill.
Yeah.
And anyone that knows Dorking, if you drive from Dorking past Box Hill and up towards like Epsom direction, there's quite an infamous hill that goes up. It's very steep. And I can remember being in the passenger seat of this Micra and Mum going from fourth to third, from third to second, second to first. And we're in the car going, are we going to make it up the hill in this thing? Like, it was gutless. It really was.
Yes. I remember a couple of Micra memories. I had a friend, his mum had one actually, and he ended up with that as his first car. And that was horrendous. That was horrifically slow.
Yeah.
And equally, I remember as a kid, we used to do a lot of caravanning holidays, and we had a number of different cars, like Montegos, Maestros. We had a Sierra 2.8 for a while, which was obviously great for towing a caravan. We also had a 1300 Astra, and I'm pretty sure we went down to the West Country, and that was kind of very similar memories of sort of multiple downshifts in order to get sort of over a train bridge or something, because you just haven't got the grunt.
I think arguably, though, the earlier Micra is a prettier car than the Bubble one.
I agree.
I thought the Bubble one was really... I remember a friend of mine was given one. I used to car share with a friend to work, and his car went into the garage for whatever reason. They gave him a Bubble Micra, and it was sort of like a purple, the same as a Cadbury's chocolate bar.
Wow.
Automatic. And we had to drive from Bognor to Portsmouth. And honestly, it was just like the gear stick was sort of sticking up in the air here. And it was,
Yes, it was really long, wasn't it? Yeah.
Automatic this one was as well. It's quite something to see. Quite embarrassing.
Pensioner spec.
Yeah, I sort of dropped me around the corner and I'll walk the rest of the way.
What sort of age were you when you got the Micra? Because obviously you were aware of the status or perhaps lack of status of that vehicle. So,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I reckon I would have been 8 or 9.
okay.
Approximately at that sort of age. But I was always, probably like the two of you, from the minute I knew what the shape of a ball was, I knew what the shape of a car was. I don't really know how it happens to toddlers, because I see it with a lot of my friends. I don't have kids myself, but I see it with a lot of my friends' kids, little boys and little girls, who clearly inherit this interest in cars and have the ability to identify everything.
Yeah.
And I can remember being in the back seat of the Cortina. I can remember being in the back seat of whatever car my dad would have been driving at a weekend and knowing what everything was, literally everything.
Yeah.
From whatever was driving past. And if I didn't know, I could ask and go, oh, what's that, Dad? Or what's that, Mum? And they'd tell me.
So that barometer for cool cars, I guess, has come from your dad's side, is it? Being in that workshop environment.
Yeah, I think it has. And again, because of the way that my dad's work was when I was very small, as I say, he was running the workshops that serviced all the company cars. So every time I'd see Dad would pop over on a Saturday, or we'd go out together on a Saturday, and he'd have a different car every week because he just took whatever was in. And some weeks it'd be something fairly exciting and fairly posh. Other weeks it'd be more run of the mill. But every so often he'd bring home something a bit extra special, and I'd have this kind of glimpse into the world of, oh, this is what a posh car looks like. And when I say posh car, it was probably something like an E36 318i.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, by the grand scheme of things, not a posh car at all. But at the time, it was like a new 3 Series BMW, and everyone knew that a 3 Series BMW was a cool thing to have. So, yeah, the scale on what was hot and what wasn't, it probably came from that. It probably came from flicking through magazines that would have been lying around at Dad's house or in the workshop, or things like good old-fashioned old Top Gear, which, again, I would have watched religiously on a Thursday night. And then when it moved on to Sundays with the new trio, again, become obsessive on that as well.
Yeah.
So Thursday's 8:30, original Top Gear.
I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah. With Quentin Wilson, Tiff Nadell, Vicky Butler-Henderson, Clarkson was there as well. Andy Willman was a presenter on it.
Yeah.
I vividly remember it.
Yeah.
And I probably somewhere in somebody's loft or shed, there'll be videotapes that I would have recorded from a Thursday night and then watched later on in the week, or again and again and again at the weekend.
What came after the Micra then? I guess if we follow this sort of tree through your mum's lineage to start with, and then we'll...
So after the Micra, there was an upgrade. I can't remember how it came about or where it came from. But again, because of Dad's world, and Mum knew a few other people in the motor trade. So cars would come up, you know, like so-and-so selling this or upgrading this. So cars would come up. And I remember one day she came home with the new car, and it was a Nissan Bluebird.
Nice.
And do you know, here's the mad thing. Again, my memory. I remember the registration, F585 FGP. I remember that car. I remember her coming home with it, and it was amazing because, firstly, it had electric windows, front and back.
Yep.
What a thing. It had a half-decent sound system with a little cassette player in the front. I I remember it felt, I mean, compared to the K10 Micra, this was like Mum's turned up in a Rolls Royce Spectre. It was like, well, hey, right, we're in. Finally, the playground is not going to be completely embarrassing because we've got a half decent car.
What colour was it?
It was like a silvery blue.
Yeah.
Silvery blue. I feel like it had very dark blue carpets inside. I remember the seats being really comfortable. Again, a real uplift from that Micra. And we would have done a few journeys in that car. That probably stuck around for a few years.
It's good to hear.
And again, I see them every so often. There are not many left now, I'm sure, but I see them every so often on the road, and I can't help but smile because it looked like a sporty thing in comparison to the Micra. Although I do remember they've got quite large rear quarter-light windows on the back of those. And a common thing that would happen is people would smash that rear quarter-light to lift up the parcel shelf to see if there was anything in the boot worth nicking.
Okay.
And I remember one day that happening and feeling like, oh no, the family car has been invaded. I remember that having a real negative impression of like, oh, how horrible people can be to do that. There wasn't anything worth nicking, but I remember it being a bit of a faff trying to find somebody that could fit that little rear window for us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a taste of crime, isn't it, potentially, that's kind of having that happen. My mum had an Astra, which got stolen from our driveway, and then you end up as far as the local school, so probably half a mile, but just the questions that go through your head, which is kind of why that happened, and then just the fact you can't really quite believe it, that where you left it isn't where it is now, and that someone would do that.
Yeah, it's true.
It's just...
It's horrible when someone's been in your car, isn't it? Or it's just not nice, is it? Someone's been rummaging around.
It's not. And I think as a child, I think the most upsetting thing for me was seeing how it upset Mum, because, of course, for her, the car is her everything. She needs that to get to work and back, and she needs that to do the school run and various other things. So suddenly the idea that somebody could have disrupted that system through a thoughtless act. And again, I remember being really bothered by that as a child.
Okay.
Yeah, it probably cost 20 quid to replace the window, if that. But it doesn't matter. For me, it was the fact that somebody has selfishly done that without thinking and therefore upset our little system.
Yeah. Do you know what came after that?
So after that, for Mum, would have been, again, it was probably a hand-me-down car from somebody, either a work colleague, but it was a early Astra.
Okay.
I'd go as far as saying it was a downgrade. I think the Bluebird was definitely an upgrade.
Yeah.
But we had a slightly faded red Astra. It was the shape of, this is the best way I can describe it, because again, I won't know the model shapes, but it was the shape of the iconic GTX with the slightly round front headlights, saloon shape. So had an actual boot. And that would have been Mum's last car. So Mum sadly died when I was 15.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have been her last car. So she didn't end on a high, sadly. But it is a car I can remember driving around in. That would have been a car, probably the last car I would have been picked up from school in, if that suited the timeline.
Yeah.
And then I think at one point Mum was like, right, okay, you're old enough to walk now. You don't need a lift to and from school. And she was a nursery nurse and later on a teaching assistant. So, of course, she needed to be in schools and doing her own school run to get to work before our time.
Yeah.
But yes, that would have been the last of her cars, which I think we sold for the princely sum of £50 when the time was right.
Yeah.
But it was, it was very much a very boring Astra. But the happiest of memories come from the era of the Cortina, the Bluebird, and probably in hindsight, quite a lot of the K10 Micra, which as begrudged as I was at the time when it made its appearance, I look back on it now and have very happy memories with it. Because, of course, the memories are associated with Mum, which is just wonderful. And, when you see that car, I'm sure there are a lot of people listening who've lost parents or lost loved ones. And they see those cars from their childhood, and it brings back so many happy memories, which is what happens with me, which is lovely.
Is there a particular song you'd go, okay, if you were to sort of paint the stereotypical picture of that, your mum kind of driving down the road, what would she be singing to? Or was she a singer? And
She was. I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact song. It'll be something Fleetwood Mac or it'll be something Sade. It has to be.
Yeah.
And in fact, funnily enough, I found in a box recently a mixtape that my mum had made, and she'd written the track listings on the back.
Oh, okay.
Track 1 was Criminal by Sade. I think that was track 1. And there would have been loads of Fleetwood Mac on there. So songs like The Chain, but again, because that's become such a huge song recently, I might be invented that memory slightly. But it'll be anything Fleetwood Mac, anything Sade, Phil Collins, all that sort of thing. I hear a lot of the songs now, and it really does take me back. The memory can be a wonderfully powerful thing and take you back to an exact journey, an exact moment in the back of a car. And it was probably for the most mundane journey, like going to Sainsbury's or going to visit the grandparents. But thinking back on it, it's just wonderful. So happy.
Yeah, you mentioned your grandparents there. Do you recall what they were driving?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I do. So, yeah, grandparents on both sides actually had some fairly interesting cars. Again, interesting in the sense of not exciting, but interesting. So my grandfather, so on my mum's side, both my grandma and granddad had a car each. Annoyingly, so as a really small child, I can remember my granddad having a car, but I can't remember what it was. And I think now, if I really think about it, it was an estate car, typically boxy, very 1980s. It would have been something like a Nissan, I don't know, it might have been a Sunny.
Yeah.
I was very, very small, but I can vaguely remember it. But I remember that car going away, and he was proud as punch because he'd bought himself a new car. So my grandfather was a reverend. He was a vicar.
Okay.
So he was quite frugal with money again, because not a high earner. But I remember at the point of him retiring, so he left the church and he bought his first house, which of course is a thing, because of course you have vicarages your whole life.
Yeah.
He bought his first house and a car to kind of celebrate the fact that he'd retired. And he bought a Daihatsu Applause, which I appreciate not everyone will be able to envisage because it's such a rare car. And it was a rare car then. But I remember thinking, again, it was quite posh. I remember the seats feeling so plush, and it was an automatic. And I must have seen, I reckon in my life, no more than 5 other Daihatsu Applauses on the road.
Yeah.
But for anyone that's racking their brains, and I'll save the Googling, it's essentially a 4-door saloon car with a boot. So think kind of BMW 3 Series sized, but slightly bubbly and slightly round. I can remember the smell of that car. I can remember the way the carpet felt. It had quite rough, coarse carpet, the kind of thing you'd find in like an office that people spill tea and coffee on. So yeah, he had that. My grandma had an original Mini, which I'd say was probably a Leyland, because it had the big centre speedo in the middle. Mm-hmm. Again, I wasn't a fan of that car as a child. I was a bit embarrassed by it because it felt really tinny. Again, slamming the doors, you'd feel the roof pop out and pop back in again. But it must have left an impression because I ended up getting a classic Mini as my first car.
Okay.
So clearly it did leave an impression on me.
Nice.
But yes, I remember those on my dad's side. So my dad's mum, my grandma, who's amazingly, she's still with us. I won't embarrass her by revealing her age, but she's a few years off getting a letter from the King.
Wow.
She is incredible lady. And I remember being a small child, and she had a Mark I Ford Fiesta.
Oh, brilliant.
Which would have been a regular weekend occurrence. She'd offer to look after my sister and I on a Friday evening so my mum could go out and be social with her friends. And we'd often be collected in this Fiesta. Again, a little bit embarrassed by it because I was aware that it wasn't an exciting car or a posh car. But you gave that wonderful story, Andy, about somebody's car being stolen and then recovered. And that happened with the Fiesta. One morning, she got a knock on the door from the local police constable going, "Oh, we found your car." And she said, "Well, I didn't know it was gone." And it had been stolen from her house in just outside Sutton, in a little town called Hackbridge, and used for a bank robbery in Wallington, on the Wallington High Street. And they'd apparently reversed the car through the window of the bank.
Wow.
To do a proper job. And she said, "Well, where is it?" And they said, "Oh, it's still in the window of the bank." She said, "Well, how do I get it back?" And the police officer said, "Well, do you want it back?" And she said, "Yes." And somehow convinced the police officer to go and get it for her, because she was like, "Well, I can't go. I don't want to hop on the bus. That's, a bit too far down the road." So she managed to talk this police officer into getting the car out of the shop and driving it back to the house. And it stayed for another few years. I think it needed a new back window. But other than that, it was right as rain. It was great. Had some crime heritage, yeah.
We had a chap called Azim on very early on in the podcast a couple of years back. And his parents had a Fiesta, didn't they? Which they sold, I think, which then was used in a bank robbery.
Yeah.
And he lives in, I think, South London.
It could be the car.
Whether it's, the same, I don't know, the same thing or... because, they got a knock on the door saying, "Have you got this car?" And they were like, "No, we sold it."
Oh, no way.
Or whether it was the same organisation who just had a fondness for Mark I Fiesta.
Fiesta ring.
Yeah, I think sadly the Fiesta, specifically the Mark I, was quite an easy car to get into and then to get started. So I think a lot of them were used for unsavoury activities.
So, that's quite funny. We've had, 2 lots of Fiestas in bank robberies come up. It's a trend.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So she kept that?
Yeah.
And what was your grandfather driving? You say he drove as well?
So I didn't really know my grandfather on my dad's side, sadly.
Okay.
But yeah, so only on that side of the family was the Fiesta.
Oh, okay.
But then, yeah, on mum's side, so granddad and grandma, that was the Daihatsu Applause and the original Mini, which I think was then later upgraded. The Mini, that became a K11 Micra as well. I think we had 2 or 3 in the family at one point, which was tremendously upset as a child. For my playground street cred, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Annoyingly, yeah, it was always dad that had the interest in cars, but he'd very rarely get involved with things like school run. My only kind of bragging rights would be on a Monday morning. I'd be like, oh, at the weekend I was in a 3 Series BMW with my dad.
So did he own a car as well, or was he just pottering in whatever was in the pool car?
So dad, in my lifetime, as far as I can remember, he's only owned 2 cars because he's always had a job either that offered a company car or a van. So yeah, my dad was in the motor trade when I was a youngster. When he stopped the job at Balfour Beatty, he became a Snap-on tools dealer.
Okay.
So he used to drive around in the big Snap-on van, which in itself was really cool for me because, of course, it's like this cave on wheels with tools and everybody knew Snap-on tools were really posh. So he had to buy a car then. And for that, he bought an Audi 80. And that, again, would have been a 1990s era. So probably the first of the Audi 80 shapes. I remember thinking that was quite cool. And he upgraded it. He put some alloy wheels on that. And I think he upgraded the sound system as you do, you know. Yeah, my dad was probably only a couple of years younger than I am now at this point when he was doing that sort of thing. So I can completely understand it now in hindsight. He stayed in the motor industry, but he was then working for Worth, who do similar thing to Snap-on, but they do a lot of oils and lubricants for the motor trade. So he had a string of company cars, always things like Astras, Toyota Corollas, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then he retired last year, and as a gift to himself, he bought himself a car that he's always wanted, which I'm chuffed to bits about because it is a really cool thing, genuinely. And he treated himself to a B8 RS4 Audi.
Okay.
Which is just such a lovely thing. And it's such a cool dad car. And ironically, I say he retired last year, and to celebrate he bought that car. He was actually since got bored of retirement and actually gone back to work for 6 months or so.
Pay for the fuel.
Well, exactly. Yeah. He may well be listening to this episode in his new company car that he's driving around in. But yeah, it was quite cool, actually. He phoned me up, must have been a year ago now, to say, right, I think I found myself an RS4. And it was up in Lincoln, of all places. And I'm currently living and working in the West Midlands. So I live in Stratford-upon-Avon. I have an office in Coventry. That's where I'm speaking to you from now. And I talked my dad into saying, look, rather than, getting the train up to Lincoln to get the train to Coventry, I'll pick you up from the station and we'll drive up together. And it was quite a nice journey, actually. So we went up together. I've got a Defender 110, new one that I drive around as my daily. So I picked him up in that and we drove up to Lincolnshire. And it felt quite funny because it should be the other way around. It should be, Dad, can I get a lift to go and get my new car? And instead it was Dad asking me for a lift to go and get his new car. But yeah, it's a lovely thing. B8, RS4.
What colour?
So it's the black. I think they call it Panther Black, which if the sunlight hits it, you get a slight reddish flake in the paint. Is a glorious thing.
What year is that car, John, roughly?
So it must be, B8 is a couple of generations old now.
2010, something like that?
I think it's about that. 8 or 9 it must be.
Nice.
But yeah, RS4 Avant, lovely thing. Really, really cool. And a good upgrade from his Audi 80 from the 1990s.
Yeah. Back at school, do you recall any kids with interesting cars? Or envious, I guess, if you had an interest in cars?
No, not really. Nothing that was kind of massively impressive. I do remember getting a lift home from school one day, and I couldn't even tell you whose parent it was that gave us the lift. But I remember getting a lift in a Citroen 2CV and thinking, this is a rubbish car. I was very much aware that it was awful. And to this day, I despise them. And I get so confused whenever I speak to anyone that says, I just love a 2CV. What are you on about? I just think they're awful. This is where one of you says, I collect them. And I feel awful.
I've never driven one.
Don't.
I've been in one. I had an aunt who had one. My mother-in-law, I think she had one. Kind of, before I knew her. Yeah, I think when my wife was little. But I don't know. I'm not sure on them. I think there is a certain charm, and the older they become, the more they sort of stick out as sort of an iconic vehicle.
Maybe.
But I don't know whether I'd go as far to drive one.
I've had no involvement. My hands are clean, John. But I'm the same as Andy. I think they're quite charming.
Okay.
They've got something about them, I think.
It's a weird thing, yeah. Do you remember watching Mr. Bean?
Yeah.
And he always had that disdain for the blue Reliant Robin.
Yeah.
And there was never an explanation as to why. He just hated it. Wherever that car was, he'd just, I hate that thing. And he'd push it out of the way or try and roll it over.
Yeah.
That's me with 2CVs, but that was me as a child. There was no influence as to why I could hate that car or should hate that car as much as I did. But to this day, I see them and I honestly grimace. I'm like, what a horrible thing. And I'm so sorry to anyone listening that's got one, because I'm sure they are quirky and brilliant, but I just don't get it. I'm sorry.
You could start up some sort of TikTok channel, John, couldn't you? Just you going around 2CV bashing, just sort of rolling them over. And
yeah. Or just, I could do a podcast series on it, just asking why. What on earth were you thinking when you decided to buy, of all the cars you could buy?
Pixelate the person's face, couldn't you? And change their voice and everything.
Yeah. But they're expensive things now. You know, they've become desirable classic cars. And again, anyone that's gone out and spent more than £10 on one, I want to have a conversation with you to find out how your brain works, because as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't.
I think Keith Floyd had one, didn't he? The chef who passed away. I don't know if you're familiar with him. But James Martin, the sort of current day chef, I think he ended up buying that car for several £1,000s. Yeah, so.
Right.
I think Johnny Smith's got one.
Has he?
Now, I've seen it on his channel, and
He may do, yeah.
I've got a feeling Chris Harris has got an involvement with one as well.
Chris Harris has got one. Yeah, Chris Harris has got a 2CV. Again, what are you playing at, Chris?
He's got one of everything though, hasn't he, Chris, from what I can tell?
I guess it's probably a complete removal from anything else. If you're driving something with all the switches and buttons and everything,
Yeah.
it's close to a go-kart, isn't it? Or without the performance and handling.
It looks very spongy
Yeah.
from the outside, doesn't it? It looks very sort of floaty and...
Wasn't it?
You can drive it over a ploughed field.
Yeah,
That was it, wasn't it? That was the whole design purpose, was the French farmer could use it
that's it.
on the road, but also in the field. But yeah, I'm not a French farmer. I don't need that sort of hassle in my life. Sorry, I've been very negative.
Are there any vehicles from your past which you kind of think, I'd like to get one of those?
As in cars that my family have owned.
Yeah, your parents or, maybe a neighbour had one, or kind of a vehicle of influence from your childhood, and you think, actually, if the time was right, I fancy one of those to relive it.
I think probably not in terms of a brown Ford Cortina, a K10 Micra, a Nissan Bluebird, or a Daihatsu Applause. But there were certainly cars that were around. I think things like, I have a real passion for BMW, and especially for BMW M. I've owned a good collection of BMW M cars. And I think that probably stems back to Dad bringing home one or two BMWs, which would have been a rare occurrence, because I think that would have been quite a senior car. So not one that would have been serviced very often by my dad. But it would have left an impression. I always thought of BMW as being a really premium brand.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely had a bit of an influence.
Yeah, of course.
I remember we had a next door neighbour when I was quite young who worked for the local Audi dealer in Wimbledon. And I remember he came home one day with the new Audi TT.
Okay.
The Mark 1, the bubble-shaped one, which again, I mean, that was a spaceship as far as I was concerned. I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And I remember just thinking, like, that's incredible. And I did later in life. I ended up buying one of those. But no, I sadly can't think of, because the pedigree wasn't huge with regards to parents' cars. I had a second cousin who I remember turned up to a Christmas function with, I think it must have been a 964, Guards Red 964 Porsche 911.
Lovely.
And I remember thinking, like, whoa, like Stuart has won the game. He's brought home a Porsche. He's since gone on to be a very, very successful businessman in the world of telecoms.
Nice.
But yeah, I remember that really leaving an impression, because I was so aware that Porsche 911s, Porsche in general, was a really premium brand. And other than, I remember sitting in it, I remember him saying, come and have a look. He could see that I was really interested in the car. So I was sat in it, and I remember it feeling special. And it was unusual because, of course, the engine was in the back and it's a shape unlike any other car. So that definitely would have had an influence. And I've bought a 911. I've had a 996 turbo in the past. And again, it has to root back to that, because as a child, we're so susceptible to these little light bulb moments that switch on. You think, oh, that's paved a journey there, whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
To the point that I'm then going and buying my own Porsche 911 turbo and thinking, like, oh, look at me now. Maybe I've got a younger relative that looks at this and goes, oh, this is exciting. He's got a cool car. So, yeah, that's probably about it, really, in terms of the inspirational side.
I've spoken to John about this before, but we've both got children, and through doing the podcast, you become aware that actually at any moment in time, something you do could be your child's earliest memory or the first memory of.
Yeah.
And it makes you kind of think, in slightly different ways, especially if you're having a bad day. Like, it's not their fault.
No.
Um,
And it's such a crucial thing. And as I say, I don't have kids myself, but I've got lots of friends that have kids. I've got a niece. I've got a few like cousins that have got little ones. And I often say the same to them. And it's that, again, because the way my memory works, I can think back on things, conversations that would have been had in cars, little moments with cars back when I was small that have definitely stuck with me and made me think about life moving forward. And it can be, again, as we were saying at the beginning, it can be such a powerful thing, the ability to inspire, the ability to reassure, the ability to talk and discuss and put minds at ease, all from the result of a car journey, or going to look at a car that you might be looking to buy, or selling a car even. The life experiences that you can get and those little triggers as a child can be so influential moving forward.
Absolutely.
It's why we're all in this industry. It's why we do what we do. The cars are just the most menial part of it all, because of course the car is the object, and without the driver pedaling it, it's a pointless entity. It's a metal box on four wheels. It's the stories that come from this, which is why your podcast is so fantastic. Unpicking these stories and unpicking these memories, which nobody really should have an interesting story to tell about a chocolate brown Ford Cortina, but yet I've rattled on for 40 minutes about one. And that's the magic of motoring. This is, as I say all the time on our podcast on Driven, it's a passion-led industry, and everybody that's in it, whether they're in it as a consumer or they're in it for a profession like us, they're in it because they like cars. It's as simple as that. Yeah. It's a passion-led industry, and there are so few other industries in the world where you can work in a world fueled by passion. The cars that I get to drive on a daily basis as a journalist now to review, I've got a brand new ID7 parked outside. I drove 85 cars last year for editorial reasons to road test. And ultimately, we could all be driving around in the modern day equivalent or a Nissan Micra. Yeah. That's all any of us actually need in the world of cars. But we are all amazing people with our own personalities, with our own desires, our own thought trains. So therefore, we want something interesting. And that's why our world in the world of cars and motorcycles is so fascinating. It's just because we're all just big kids at heart, and we all want something that makes us smile and makes us happy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us, John.
Thanks, John.
Pleasure.
That's a really nice place to wrap it up.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been good fun. And where can people find you and what you get up to? Just a quick plug.
Yeah, thank you. If you search for the Driven podcast, you'll find my podcast. The website is driven.site, and there you'll see everything that we do in terms of written reviews. We do handpicked news stories, all of our videos on there. We've got a YouTube channel as well. You can just search for Driven on YouTube and you'll find us. And then if you want to follow me on Instagram, by all means do. It's just at John Marcar. It's just my name, nice and easy to find. And the same with Driven, nice and easy. It's driven.site on Instagram, and exactly the same as the website, driven.site.
Right.
And you'll see everything we do.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, gents.
Thanks, John. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, mate. Yeah, I shall see you soon.
Cool. That was good. Enjoyed that one.
Yeah, nice. Nice chat.
Indeed. Yeah, some good stories. And I don't know whether it was the stories I was expecting. I think given what he does, I was kind of thinking there was something a bit more exotic maybe in his parents' back catalogue.
Yeah.
But yeah, aside from kind of the Porsche and I suppose sort of a dabble with the BMWs on his father's side, it wasn't particularly exotic, but good memories. And
yeah, obviously losing his mother at a young age, obviously lots of fond memories, aren't there, from, I know he sort of says they're quite mediocre cars back then, but hold a special place in his memory, don't they?
I think, yeah, if you're in that position at the time, you don't realise kind of maybe the sentimentality of those memories, but it could be, travelling in a Micra, or it could be, a walk to the shop, or a meal, or watching the telly. Like, actually, it's only when those people have gone that you then kind of realise the significance of that time. Or, when you see that car coming down the road or a similar one, it's all of a sudden, it sort of opens up another memory.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, the car ended up doing exactly what it is. It becomes the vehicle for like the music and the conversations and all that sort of stuff, doesn't it? So
yeah,
strong stuff.
Yeah,
I was desperate to get in a clapped out joke for that applause, but I couldn't find the space to get it in there. So
I had a quick look. They sort of got sort of hints of Toyota or sort of Mitsubishi maybe of the early 90s. Yeah, and I seem to recall, I've not had a lot of dealings with them, but interior-wise, he mentioned it was sort of luxury, or luxury-ish. I kind of recall that it was a little bit like sort of the discount sofa shop where it was luxury, but for a short period of time.
Right, okay.
It felt nice on the day you bought it, and perhaps maybe wouldn't have worn as well as...
Old on day 7, yeah.
gain a bit of sag to it. But yeah, nice car. And yeah, obviously his mum's sister, his aunt, gifted them the car.
Yeah.
Which, as they say, you can't look a gift horse in the mouth, can you? And like, if someone gives you a car, you're a bit down on your luck, maybe, then it gets you there and back.
Absolutely, yeah. I guess being gifted a car is a lot less common nowadays, isn't it? Because it's so easy just to sell anything anywhere. So maybe back in the day, it was a lot trickier just to.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, yeah, I suppose even if it's a banger that you can whack it on Facebook for 100, 200 quid.
Yeah.
And to most people these days, actually, that £200 would make a difference, wouldn't it? At the end of the month, that's a bit of shopping and
a bag of chips,
a few bags of chips, and but yeah, that does make a difference. And maybe back in the day, it was considered a bit too. I suppose if you went to a dealer and they offered you an insulting amount for your Micra, if they were only going to give you 50 quid for it, then
what's the point? Yeah,
perhaps it's better off going to someone else. Yeah, all they were going to do was weigh it in, or it would go through an auction for tuppence and get bang erased or something. So yeah, wonderful. Yeah, thanks to John. Please do look up his podcast. Yeah, really nice of him to join us.
Yeah,
cool. Okay, thank you very much, John.
Pleasure.
Wrap this up. We'll roll the credits.
Thank you for listening to My Dad's Car. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please support us. Buy us a coffee and subscribe. And tell all your friends.